I'm here with Tobi Rates, the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Oregon. Thank you very much for being here and interviewing.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
And I always like to start off these conversations with a little backstory, right? Because I'm very kind of picky about who I interview. And here's why. My focus is to talk to people who have unique experiences. And I want to lay the foundation for those of you listening as to the person that's going to be talking about autism now knows more in her sleep than I do in a 24-hour day. So, yeah, I know. You keep like this self, like, you know, this demeanor of like, you know, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you're such an amazing person that you don't give yourself enough credit for. And the work that you do for the organization and the things that you have done in Oregon to make things better for people on the spectrum has to be kind of recognized, right? Because at the same time that you're doing all of this amazing work, you're having to deal with home.
Yeah.
And your wonderful son, who just passed away recently, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to talk to you today was about him.
Okay.
Because all of the time I get questions from parents like, what do I do? Like, how do I do? Like, what do I do? And I guess the first question I have is like, at what point did you know something was different?
Oh, because now I have two sons who are both autistic. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the reason why I giggled was because you are autistic. You live it. Yeah. You have a completely different experience and lens on autism than I do. It's sort of like, I hope this doesn't sound bad, but the old saying about bacon and eggs.
Yeah.
The pig is committed. The chicken's involved, but the pig is committed. I'm the chicken.
I like that analogy. Thank you.
Oh, good. I was hoping that'd go the right way. Definitely not calling you a pig. So back to my kids. And this is how I got into autism, because I knew nothing about autism before I had autistic kids. And so I have two sons. My older son is 24. He's autistic. He only has an educational identification. He's never had a formal medical diagnosis. And while he's a wonderful and unique individual, he has pretty minimal support needs. I mean, he's 24. He needs the supports that I think any 24-year-old would need. Right. And he has just a wonderful, idiosyncratic look on the world. And then my younger son, Jake, who, as you mentioned, recently passed away. He was 18. He would have been 19 now. He was also autistic. He was had both medical and educational diagnoses. And he was non-speaking and also had intellectual disability, and he needed enormous amount of support. He needed an adult with him at all times to keep him safe. So they're both autistic, and I learned a lot from both of them, but in very different ways.
And I would imagine that the difference was striking.
Oh yeah.
But also a lot of similarities, right?
Yeah. And sometimes the differences were really illuminating. So my older son, so for example, he was obsessed with letters and numbers. He learned, and I later found out there's a term for that. It's called hyperlexic. Okay. But when he was 18 months old, I had some magnetic letters on the refrigerator, and he saw them, and I said, and within 10 minutes, he had half the alphabet down. And he looked at me like I'd given him the keys to the kingdom. He loved it. He knew the alphabet by the time he was 2. He knew it in order by the time he was 3. He could count up to 10,000 by the time he was 5. He taught himself how to read before kindergarten. I just thought he was brilliant. Yeah. I didn't realize this hyperlexic and there's some different thing with the numbers. But he was obsessed. He loved them. But he was verbal. He was speaking, but he was doing a lot of what's called echolalia, where he would repeat what was being said. And by his intonation, when I'd say, would you like apple juice? And by the way he said, would you like apple juice? I could tell if that was a yes or a no. But I realized other people needed to understand him.
Can I pause that for a second there? Because I think that's something I want to talk about just briefly, right? Because, what is the difference? Was it tone?
Yeah.
Was it pitch?
Yeah, it was sort of intonation and pitch where and I'm not totally sure the difference between those two, but
Right.
where he'd say, when I'd say, do you want some apple juice? And he'd go, do I want apple juice? Or do I want apple juice? And it just, I'm his mommy. I could understand him. I could figure it out. But like I said, other people needed to be able to understand him. And I recognized that. So it was actually through his preschool, I think, where they did the child find thing through the school, where they did the evaluation.
Yeah.
And based on what what I reported and his dad, my husband, reported, they said, no, we don't think he's autistic. Based on what the teacher reported, they said, we're going to give him an autism identification.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because we just didn't see it. He was our first child. We just, the things that, I know some of the things that she realized were stems, we didn't realize they were stems. They were just things Willie did.
So that's like almost the exact same thing that my father went through with me. Right? Like all of these signs were there. And I talk to him all the time where he tells me stories. It's like, how did you not know I was autistic, Dad?
We didn't know about autism then.
We didn't know about it.
Your dad's probably my age. We didn't know about autism as kids. And I'll tell you, even when they gave him the educational diagnosis, my husband and I didn't agree with it. Mm-hmm. But I remember talking with him and saying, he's not autistic. That's ridiculous. But if this will get him the supports and services he needs for his language, I don't care. Call him Mud. Call him whatever you want to call him. Yeah. And part of the reason I didn't agree with it was because I had, by that time, 2 of my nephews had been diagnosed with autism. And the big difference, Willie was very affectionate, whereas my nephews were not. They would not give hugs to anyone but their parents. So I was like, he's really affectionate. How can he be autistic? Right. That was kind of the extent of my knowledge of autism at the time. And I didn't know that people could have different sensory processing, and that could make you more or less, willing to have a hug. Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, and it was helpful that because Billy then had an IEP and he started kindergarten and all that. He was so far ahead academically because he could already read and he already knew all those numbers. They could really focus on the areas that he needed help in, which was the communication and social. So that helped.
Which I would imagine were the biggest struggles. Right?
Yes, absolutely, still are. And then, so I was actually pregnant with Jacob at this time. Okay. While Willie was getting all these diagnoses. And then Jakey was born, and I knew there's a lot of autism in my nephews. So before Jakey was born, my sister had a son. And he was diagnosed with autism when Jake was about 1. Okay. And I thought, all right, there's clearly Jake's going to be autistic too. Right. There's just no chance.
The acceptance button had been pushed.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we joked because then my sister had a son after my son who was not autistic, and we just don't know what happened to him.
Oh, I love that.
But Jake was about a year, and I realized he wasn't pointing. And I realized I knew enough by then to realize that was an indication that he might be autistic, and the whole theory of mind thing. And then he didn't develop speech. He seemed to like he was on the edge of starting to talk at about 14 months, and then just didn't, and that just happened over and over again. And he would have a word or two or a sound, and then just nothing would follow up on that. So
if you're talking about that for a second there, because I just want to get an idea or like a mental picture of what that looks like, right? So was he trying to like form sounds or consonants and like wasn't able to do words, or just wasn't actually doing any sort of verbal acknowledgement at all?
The second. Okay. He didn't have any problems with praxias where you have problems making the sounds and all. Yeah. He could make any sound he wanted to. He wasn't processing that those sounds we were making are communication.
Gotcha.
It was more of a processing error.
Okay.
For him. That's what we used to jokingly call it. But they did, they wanted to test his hearing first of all. And I knew his hearing was fine because my son would turn on Bob the Builder and Jake would come running in from wherever he was. He danced to the song. We got some video of him dancing. It's really cute. But so they did the hearing test. They had to put him under to do the hearing test because he was not cooperative with the hearing test. Yeah, they can test hearing when you're asleep.
Oh, I would have never thought.
No, I had no idea. I remember them trying to test his hearing, and Jake, there was just no cooperation there. He didn't know what they wanted from him. And then, because at that time, this was, he was 2 years old, so about 2006 time period. Our insurance didn't cover autism evaluation. And honestly, at that time, a lot of people did not want to get an autism diagnosis for their child.
Oh, interesting.
Because insurance wasn't covering. Oh, yeah. This changed during the time I've been here at ASO, that private insurance at the time was refusing to cover autism. So if you for example, a child like Jake who needed speech therapy, okay, they'd cover that. But if he's autistic and needs speech therapy, no, they're not going to cover it.
In what world does that make sense?
It doesn't. I mean, it took a lot to get it changed. That's one of the things we did here through ASO. But because they weren't covering autism evaluations, and it was going to be like $3,000 out of pocket, I found, which we didn't have, we were living back east at the time, and I found a study through the National Children's Hospital and enrolled him in that study. And based on what they did all sorts of evaluation things with him, play evaluations and whatnot. And based on that, they said to me, yes, this child is quite clearly autistic. Uh-huh. We can't technically give the diagnosis because that wasn't part of this study, but we're going to send this information to your pediatrician and she can.
Okay.
Now, the pediatrician knew nothing about autism, but she's the one who's signed on the paperwork as having given Jake his autism diagnosis.
That's interesting.
Yes. So he was, I think he was about 2.5 by the time he got his autism diagnosis, as opposed to my older son, Lily, who was 4.5 when he got his. So, it was, and it took me a while to realize that there's a huge difference between a 4-year-old verbal but non-communicative child getting an autism diagnosis and a 2-year-old nonverbal child getting an autism diagnosis. They're very different things.
And I would imagine, like, you get this diagnosis, you think the world is going to be open to you, you think, like, all of the solutions are going to come your way, like, the government's going to help you out, and then that harsh reality of what the current situation is sinks in.
And like I said, this was back east. I was in the Washington, D.C. area. My first thought was, when Willie got his educational identification, he had great success in preschool with it.
Yeah.
They were wonderful with him. He went on, and then he went on to kindergarten. He had some supports, but he was doing really well. I thought, that's how it's going to, we'll just send him to preschool.
Right.
And the same thing with the non-speaking. I assumed, okay, he's not talking. You send him to a speech therapist. They do this, that, whatever, and he starts talking.
Right.
No. I found out we don't know why humans talk. And as a result, we don't know why humans don't talk.
Interesting.
Yeah. I was shocked when I realized, what do you mean you don't just get my kid to talk?
Blew my mind.
Yeah. You don't, because I would see on his chart, severely speech delayed. I'm like, okay, what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really know what to do.
You don't know what to do.
And we did send him to a speech therapist who was a very nice young woman who said, I really don't know what to do with him. I think you need someone who knows more about autism. Because, she was trying, and she did. She got him after however many weeks of speech therapy. She'd go 1, 2, and it was ready, set, and he'd say, go. And she got him to do that. And then she went on vacation for 2 weeks. Never came back. I mean, in terms of Jake was never able to do that again.
So she went on vacation, and in 2 weeks he lost the ability to say go, and he never came.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. He was so sweet. He would look at you like, whatever. I'm trying, Mom. I'll do whatever you want, but I got no idea what you want from me. He just was. I mean, he was a very compliant, sweet kiddo, but he just. It didn't process for him. So
how did you learn how to communicate?
Oh, slowly. And one answer that I think a lot of your listeners may not like was ABA therapy. We were helped in once again, wasn't covered by insurance, so we were paying out of pocket. I had a family member who was working on that with her child, and she suggested it highly. We started working with a group, and this was back east, and it was okay. We were moving here to Oregon, or I probably would have fired them. Right. But we let it play out, and they were okay. But then we moved to Oregon. We had them set up. I was doing my research. So we moved out here. It was the end of June 2008. He started in the preschool special ed program in Clackamas County, ESD. I think he started that Tuesday. And then that Thursday, we had him start in an ABA therapy. And it was people came to the house and they made it, if it hadn't been fun for Jake, we wouldn't have done it. That was clear. We were always of the do no harm variety. But what we started on was PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System. And they showed us things, and they taught us how to communicate with him so that, Jakey loved his Cheerios. If we gave him we gave him a picture of a Cheerio, had him give it to us, sort of hand over hand, and then we gave him a Cheerio. And he did learn very quickly that's how we could get a Cheerio. Or anything else he wanted was to give us the picture of a potato chip. He'd get a potato chip, and that was his first way of communicating with us. And it was much easier, it was a lot easier than him crying for something. It was also, although his favorite way of asking for something was just to take my arm and move it up to what he wanted. But he was willing to take the picture thing. And with the pictures, he was so very visual. Because he also did do some sign language. Okay. With sign language, for example, he could ask me for a chip by using the C over his hand. With the picture, he could ask me for a potato chip versus a corn chip versus a Dorito. He had a much wider vocabulary with the pictures.
So did he have like a notebook?
Yeah. He had the little PECS notebook, and it was child size because he was little at that age, Jake was also very communicative, just facial, non-verbally. Like he got his point across. Yeah. And Jake was very quick to pick up on patterns and routines. And which I always said, it's how he made the world make sense to him. So if he wanted to go for a drive, and he loved driving in the car, he would bring me my purse. Because he knew if I was going to take him on a ride somewhere, I would grab my purse and my keys, and the keys were in the purse. So he would bring my purse to me, and of course it was like half his size. He'd top him over with it, and I'm like, "Oh, do you want to go for a drive?" And he did this thing, particularly later on. He didn't simply nod yes. We called it the full body nodded. We called it the full body nod.
And something I always talk to people about too, because like one of those things that's not talked about in terms of being autistic is the concept of autistic joy.
Oh yeah.
And that the fact that I heard it once, I'm the kind of person, I don't wag my tail wags me. I can't turn it off. If something happens that's good, I'm beaming for days and I can't shut it off.
Why would you?
At the same time, I don't experience anger, right? It's just not an emotion I've ever had to deal with.
Wow.
I kept myself lucky for that.
Yeah.
And do I get frustrated? Absolutely. But I get angry.
Yeah.
And I think that's the autism maybe too.
And definitely how it is for you. I would say I've seen frustration in both my kids. I've seen anger, but more like flashes of it.
Yeah.
With Jake, like I said, normally I think his personality was he was a happy, sweet personality. He also figured out very early on that if he smiled real cute, he usually got what he wanted. But as impacted as Jakey was, he was pretty manipulative. Okay. Particularly, how to manipulate mommy the best. But he knew that. If he didn't know what was going on, which was a good bit of the time, his default was to smile. Because I think he'd figured out very early on that generally got him what he wanted.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he had a good way of, people wanted to help Jake. They wanted to do things for him because he was so sweet. And he knew that.
What are some of those bigger obstacles, though, to getting your kid help, right? Because,
now?
Yeah.
The first big obstacle is getting an autism diagnosis. that is huge. And the fact that, particularly in Oregon, and it may be in other states, but I know Oregon best, in order to get the full range of supports and services, you want both a medical diagnosis and an educational evaluation.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because until I became involved with ASO, I had no idea that both of them were needed.
Yes.
And it's so important. I'm so glad you talked about that. What's the difference between the two?
So the medical diagnosis is what you might assume is through a medical doctor, whether it's a psychologist, a developmental pediatrician, or for an adult, a psychologist.
Yeah.
Technically, any doctor can give an autism diagnosis.
Okay.
You don't have to have special training. However, most prefer to refer on to a specialist just because they don't feel comfortable giving a diagnosis. Right. The problem with a medical diagnosis of autism, there's a huge waiting list because it's not as simple as a blood test. That would be great. Instead, generally best practice is a multidisciplinary team undergoes several different evaluations of this person, and it takes all day. And sometimes it's 2 half days, but it does, that limits the number of people who can be seen. Now, this is specific for children. For adults, you have psychologists and they'll have evaluations, which can take quite a bit of time and several $100s. But with children in particular, especially with young children, it can be a really tricky thing of, is this child presenting this way because they have a disability, because they're autistic, or is this just a developmental stage they're going through? So there's a lot of teasing out of that. Although you can diagnose autism, I think, as young as 18 months.
Oh, okay. Didn't used to be that way, though, right?
Generally by age 3, but is what they like to see. But, that is... So it's a difficult evaluation, it's a difficult evaluation process. There was always backups and delays in the system, and COVID just made that worse because the main diagnostic tool is called the ADOS. I forget what that stands for. Right. But the ADOS is not approved to be used with COVID protections. So, for example, if someone's got a mask over their face, they're not getting how are you going to get the data you need? If you're physically separated from the person, you're not getting the data you need. So it's not, so there just wasn't a lot of autism diagnosing going on during COVID. Plus, all the protocols in place. So that made a bad situation worse. The other factor is that we simply do not have enough trained specialists in Oregon.
100%.
The developmental pediatricians are very low, and there's very few in the pipeline. It's not a specialty that people are going into.
And it's hard to find as an adult, right? Mm-hmm. On the therapy side.
Yeah.
It took me 5 years to find a therapist with any experience with autism. I love him. I'm not going anywhere else. He's no longer covered by insurance. So I have to private pay. But I'm paying because once you find somebody that
you keep them.
Because I used to spend 20 minutes of my counseling session explaining autism to the counselor and then working through the issues of the day, week, month.
Yeah, and how are they going to help you work through those issues if they know nothing about autism?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And so with this guy here, I tell him what's going on. He's like, I bet you thought this, or I bet you looked at this. And he always, finding those people that know autism and can support. That's rare.
Finding someone who knows autism, who can support autism, who's covered by your insurance, is taking on new patients. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a problem, and it's a problem throughout. It's not just with autism, but it's throughout all mental health care.
Yeah.
Which is weird because autism is under mental health care for insurance purposes, even though autism is not a mental illness.
I never did understand that one.
Because it's not physical, I think was their thinking. They didn't know where to put it.
Yeah. This fits. Here you go.
Yeah. And this doesn't really fit, but we'll force it into it. And then they also, and it's interesting because there are generally more specialists available for children, but there's still not nearly enough.
Right.
And then it's a desert for adults, including for things like just general health care.
Yeah.
I get asked a lot, are there doctors, general practitioners who specialize in working with autistic patients? And the answer is no. And it seems like it'd be a great niche for someone, but it makes it really hard. You basically have to find a general practitioner who is simpatico, who will accommodate, and whose office staff can provide accommodations.
I just want a doctor who doesn't look at me and tell me that I'm too high functioning to be autistic.
Yeah, geez.
Because that happens all the time with doctors. Right?
And they think they're giving you a compliment, don't they?
I think they do think that.
So it's like, thank you for totally negating who I am, but
it's like, but you don't see me on my worst days.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And now, frankly, my worst days are nowhere near as bad as they were before all the work. But now I know my worst days aren't there, but they still happen.
Sure.
Right? Sensory overload and sensory burnout is still a thing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But I do want to circle back because we talked about medical, but then you also talked about the educational piece.
The educational.
Because that's the piece I'm always missing. Because I'm just thinking like medical diagnosis you get from a doctor.
You get from a doctor.
And then you automatically get a 501(c), but that's not the case, right? 501(c). Not a 501(c). The case plan. The you just mentioned it.
The IEP?
IEP. Thank you.
Okay, no, they are completely, sure, totally understood. They brought up all sorts of different numbers for me. But, so the medical diagnosis through a medical doctor, you have to find that doctor. You normally need to get a referral from your pediatrician. There's a long wait. You better find someone who takes your insurance or else it's going to be a big out-of-pocket cost. And there's no time limit in which that has to be done.
Like multiple thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like I said, I was
like $100.
No, I was quoted $3,000, 18 years ago. Yeah. So I'm sure it's probably in that range now. It's technically an educational identification because you're not getting a medical diagnosis. This is done through the school system.
Okay.
There's no cost and there is a time limit, which is nice.
A time limit for the school?
For the school.
Okay.
For the school. So technically speaking, depending on the age of the child, the school district has between 45 and 60 school days in which to do the evaluation once the parents have consented to it. So this is only for people really age 3 to 21. It'd be very unusual to someone have an evaluation at the age of 21. Right. So you're usually talking young children. If they are not yet in kindergarten, it would be through in Oregon, their educational service district.
Okay.
Which is it's a conglomeration of school districts that all get special ed supports through the same place so they can, aggregate the need. And then once they reach kindergarten age, it would be through their school.
Okay.
And if they're not, if they're in private school, if they're homeschooled, it would be through the school they'd be assigned to if they were going to public school. So once they can get the consent form, and we are hearing stories of some districts that are delaying getting the consent forms to parents to delay the start of that time limit. And that's a concern. But parents sign the consent form. The school then has 45 to 60, depending on the age of the child, school days. So this is days school is in session. So it doesn't include summer break. It doesn't include winter break. It doesn't include weekends. It doesn't include holidays. So if you sign your permission in late May, you're looking at September before they're October before they're getting this done. Okay. 60 school days roughly translates into 90 actual days.
Okay.
During the school year.
Minus the summer break.
Yeah, minus summer break. Take all that out. 10 weeks. Once again, it's usually a multidisciplinary team of educators in different areas who evaluate the child. It has changed, and this is one thing that ASO worked on. They're now working under the same criteria to determine if the child's autistic. Used to be different criteria than the medical used.
Which is why we need ASO.
Yeah. Well, it took years, and I'll brag on Jakey a little bit.
Yeah.
There was a group that was working on for years to get that changed, and they met all sorts of resistance from the
Who was resisting this change?
The Department of Education, who they were like, no, this is important, whatever.
So I do want to touch on this just a little bit, if you don't mind.
No.
Is it teachers that are pushing back, or is it administrators that are pushing back? Because I hear from teachers all the time that they want to do better, they want to do this, they want to do this, and then they get roadblocks from administrators. Is it the administrators?
In my experience, it is not. It's not the teachers. It's the administrators. It's the higher ups who are, the Board of Education, the superintendents, the administrators. Yeah, it's not the people working with our kids. Not that I've seen.
And to me, like, that part of it never made sense to me. Like, why would you take a conscious effort to push against something that will help people? I never understand that.
Generally, because it will either cost them money or make them work harder. That's the
reality.
This is a digression, but God, I'm trying to remember. Oh, we had tried. There was a parent actually who was working on this, and we were helping, where to simply get a law that said that the school district had to, at the annually print a list of what supports and services were available and what was being provided, so that people knew what to ask for.
Right.
Huge pushback. It never got approved, because a lot of times what happens is a parent sues the school system.
Yeah. They
reach an agreement. That agreement is confidential, and the parents are then not allowed legally to tell other parents what their kid is getting. So creates this two-tiered system where the people who have access to attorneys are getting better services for their kids and more services. However, so we wanted just
Thank you for that digression.
So we worked on getting that approved, and it has not been. And I remember one director of special education services said, if that goes through, we're going to be spending a ton of money not on providing those services to other families, but on hiring the lawyers to make sure they don't have to provide those services to other families.
What the heck kind of garbage statement is that?
She's no longer at that she's no longer a head of special education, but that is not a mindset that was specific to her, I'm sure. It's
one of those things where they say it, but they're never going to say it out loud. But in this one instance, they said it out loud.
I was like, could you repeat that? Can I record you on that? Yeah, it was shocking.
How that must have felt to hear that from an administrator.
Yeah, they were, rather than do the right thing by these
field, right?
Unfortunately, it didn't. It was
really?
So, the idea that rather than do the right thing by these kids, we're going to fight tooth and nail to not have to do it. Yeah.
It just seems so backwards.
Yeah, it's so counterproductive. It just doesn't make any sense. But I can't speak for that mindset, except to say that, I think in the bureaucratic way of looking at things, that to them it made a sense somehow. Financially, fiscally. And the educational the difference between educational and medical is that they not only have to find that the child meets the criteria for an autism identification, but also that due to their disability, they need help in accessing their education. So there has to be that impact on education to get educational services, which makes sense when you think about it. But the thing is, and it's very clear, I think, in the federal law, education doesn't simply mean learning your reading, writing, arithmetic.
Right.
It also means those social aspects. Mm-hmm. So for my older son, he was, like I said, academically, he was ahead going into kindergarten, so they could work on those other things, the social aspects and the communication aspects. And even when it came time, because every 3 years they will renew the educational identification.
Okay.
And usually it's pretty pro forma. But, they would say, luckily we were in a school, because not every school does this, where they say, we recognize he's doing great academically.
Yeah.
But social communication, he still needs supports, and therefore he's still entitled to special education services.
So I would imagine there are instances, though, where they still have that, but if the teacher just automatically says, I don't think that's necessary, then they're kind of denied.
Well, it's not the teacher. Once again, it's
that's where I'm getting mixed up on.
So the 3-year review and that's under the law. They've got to be reviewed every 3 years for the educational identification. That's where sometimes you can have someone say, well, they're doing fine academically. Why do they need special ed services? Yeah. And that is an educational opportunity to explain that education is not just what he's getting graded on. It's also the social and communication aspects and the behavioral aspects.
Because in essence, we're trying to prepare our kids for a successful existence as human beings.
Yes.
Right? It's not just about arithmetic.
Right.
It's about all of the other stuff.
It'd be a lot easier in schools if it were just about arithmetic, but it is not. Generally, an IEP, an individualized education plan, which is a legal document. And that's why you want accommodations and things in that IEP, because the teacher is then required by law to follow it. Doesn't mean that implementation isn't an issue, particularly when you get a teacher who just doesn't want to implement it, who, has decided on their own that this child really doesn't need that and they're not going to do that. You're not in the classroom with your child. Your child may not be capable, even if they are verbal, of explaining what's going on and what the teacher isn't doing that they're supposed to do. So,
the communication piece isn't there already.
Yeah, that makes it harder.
And
Yeah. But even if your child can communicate, very few 8-year-olds understand what their teacher is supposed to be doing that they're not doing,
Yeah.
And of course,
8-year-olds aren't going to say something and go against the face of authority anyway.
Yeah. And certainly, anecdotally, I've heard of, parents saying, well, aren't you able to eat, let's say an accommodation is, you can eat your lunch by yourself. Aren't you able to do that? No, my teacher says not. And, but unless the parent has a reason to ask that, they're not going to find that out.
Right, because who would ask you, are you eating alone?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought, you just automatically kind of assume as a parent, if it's in writing and they have to follow the rules, that they're just going to do it.
Yeah. Now, and I will say, as a parent, you meet the teachers and sometimes you go, okay, this one's going to be an issue.
Okay.
And that's why people ask a lot, what school should I send my child to? What's the best school? And it's like, first of all, what each child needs varies widely, but also not only do the schools vary from district to district, but from school to school, from class to class. Yeah. You can have a great 3rd grade teacher and a lousy 4th grade teacher. Mm-hmm. You just don't know. That's why there's not, go to that school.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. I can probably tell you which ones not to go to.
So anyway, circling back, and you said, so Jake, you said you used Jake to get that changed in Oregon.
Oh, that's right. So yes, for years, this group had been working on getting the diagnostic criteria to match what the medical folks are using, the DSM-5.
Now, to me, as an outside observer who's never heard this before, right? No brainer.
I would think so too.
Yeah, no brainer.
And for some reason, like I said, they pushed on it for 11 years. I wasn't really a part of that until kind of late in the session or late in the game. They asked me to provide some testimony for, I think it was the Board of Education in Salem about why. Because it was, and my testimony was, it is absolutely mind-boggling and ridiculous, the fact that a child can be medically diagnosed with autism but not have an educational identification because they're using different criteria, and therefore that child is autistic everywhere except in the schoolhouse. How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
So that was my testimony. But the way Jakey figured in, it just so happened he was with me that day because I didn't have any, his dad was out of town and his PSW was unavailable. So Jakey was with me. I brought him to Salem with me. I think it was summer. He didn't have school. And he sat next to me. It was pretty informal. We were just around a big horseshoe-shaped table. And he sat next to me while I gave my testimony. And he was just Jakey. And you could tell, this is the child we're talking about. And giving people a visual, letting them meet an autistic person really changes them. And it makes them see, okay, we're not talking about a abstract child out there. We're talking about this child. Now, Jake did have an educational identification, so he was not one of those children who was autistic everywhere but the schoolhouse. But I think just it really seemed to impact them, the folks making that decision, and they did. They approved it. I think there's a couple little differences. I really don't know the ins and outs of it, but generally speaking, if you meet the medical criteria for autism, you meet the educational criteria for autism, but then there is that second step of, is it impacting your education? By the way, to circle back, I think one of the reasons why they were so against it was they didn't want to take the decision making about whether the child was autistic out of the hands of the educational professionals. Because if you come in with a medical diagnosis and say, okay, I've already got the diagnosis, you don't need to reevaluate that. We just need to know if he meets the second step. I think they felt that would be taking it out of the hands of their educational folks.
And people tend to react in weird ways when they perceive their power is being taken from them.
The pettier the kingdom. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like that terminology. So what kind of activities did you like to do with Jake? What kind of things, because the tendency from what I'm hearing is for people to stay at home.
Yeah.
It
was interesting because part of it was finding things to do with Jake, and that he would like to do. With me and Jake, so he loved car rides.
Yeah.
So when we first moved to Oregon, that's how I learned the roads and the streets. We would go on long car rides, and he had a blast back there. I think he liked the movement. He was very much a sensory seeker. So lights, noise, nothing bugged him. And he loved driving the car. It was funny one time when my husband bought a car, and that it was new to us, but it was a used car, and it had the blackout stuff on the windows. Well, Jake got in that car and burst into tears. He was probably 6 or 7 years old. Okay. And we're like, well, what's the matter, Jakey? What's the matter? And we realized he couldn't see out of the window because of the blackout curtain stuff. It hindered his view. So, Dale ripped it off, and then Jake was happy.
Perfectly fine.
Yeah, perfectly happy. Once now he could see again. So, and then when he got older, he used to love to stick his head out the window into the wind, which cracked me up. But, so a lot of car rides, and we also loved to go shopping together. Particularly before COVID, and then once again when COVID subsided, we would go. I'd take him out for a long ride, and then we'd do our errands. We'd go grocery shopping, and he ate his way through the grocery store. He loved that. We'd go out to lunch. He enjoyed that. I take, particularly when he was little, we'd take him to different parks and stuff. He didn't play on a playground the way a typical child would.
Okay.
He normally loved to just run around the perimeter. Yeah. That was big for him, excuse me. And for slides, he loved to walk up the slide part. So if there was other kids waiting to come down, that have to kind of work with him on that. He loved to run around. He loved being outdoors. He really did enjoy swimming later on. Once he learned how to swim, because that was hard. So yeah, those were the main things we did, honestly, was, I remember taking him on a hike one time. Yeah. It was so funny. He was okay with it. He wasn't loving it, but he was okay with it. But coming back, there was a big hill to climb coming back up, and he got tired, and he was young enough that he could sit on my lap still, and because he got taller than me by the time he was about 12, but we were walking up this hill, and he made the sign to me to sit. So I'm like, okay, sure, we'll take a rest. So we sat down on the blacktop, whatever. And after a few minutes, I was like, okay, we've rested long enough. Let's go back up. Let's keep walking. And he reluctantly did. And then we got a little further up, and then he's made the sign to sit again. But this time he got smarter. He sat on my lap once I sat down.
Now he can control when to get up.
Exactly. And he didn't have to sit on the hard ground. He was sitting on Mom's lap. So yes, and he controlled when we got back up. So we waited till he was ready. And then, I ended up, I think, probably piggybacking him up most of that hill.
How did you handle people that would give you a hard time?
Because of Jakey?
Yeah. Because I see this all the time. Yeah. Right? I have a friend. Right? She has a grandchild who's non-speaking, and she struggles with how to tell people or how to interact with people, because people are a little, at first, when you see, they're kind of reluctant, they're kind of standoffish.
A couple of different things. One is, and it's part of with our autism walks, like when we had in Portland, the ones coming up in Salem, we give a T-shirt, an autism walk T-shirt to everyone who registers. And the reason we do that is autism is an invisible disability. So what I tell people is, if you're going somewhere and you think your child's going to have a hard time or you're going to have a hard time, wear the T-shirt. And if your kiddo won't wear the T-shirt, wear it yourself.
Yeah.
It gives people a clue that there's some, because when your child acts up in public or is having it getting sensory overwhelmed, whatever, heading into meltdown, people, they assume either the child is a brat, or the parent is a lousy parent.
Yeah.
And what I tell people is, when you wear the T-shirt, it gives people a clue that there's something else going on here, and it gives them the opportunity to be kind, to assume that nothing is, maybe to assume that there's a disability rather than a crappy parent. I would say we generally didn't have anyone treat us badly. I can remember one or two cases, and it was usually on them. I'm trying to think a couple of different stories I was thinking of. I would say it was like when we would go to the park when he was little, it was harder on me than it was on him, because at home he was just Jake.
Yeah.
But at the park, I could really see the developmental differences between him and other children. And that was hurtful for me. He was happy. He was happy running around, going up the slide, whatever. I remember this one little girl when he was about 5, this little girl who looked about 5, came over and she's like, I want to play with him. And Jake, as far as Jake had no interest in other children.
Right.
They were furniture as far as he was concerned.
Okay.
At best, he ignored them. At worst, they were going to play with his stuff. And so, no, he had no interest in them whatsoever. So he didn't register that this little girl existed. And I just had to say, maybe not today, sweetie, another time. He had no, and he didn't have, interactive play.
Yeah.
He did. Now, my older son, like I said, they're 4 years older. And Willie insisted that Jake play with him when they were little.
Okay.
He was the world's best therapist for Jakey, because he was like, and he would give him piggyback rides. He'd roughhouse with him. Jake loved that. He got to the point where he would seek Willie out to play with him. Yes. That was, and Willie not only, at 4 years, there was a big developmental difference regardless, and also a big, and Willie was always tall. Willie was taller than me by the time he was 10.
Okay.
So I think Jake saw him as another adult in a lot of ways. But yeah, so Jake didn't have much interest in playing with other kids, but he would play with his brother. The only times, I remember another story, our PSW, who's like a member of the family, and she had Jake out at a playground, and this one she just started with us. He was
unsung heroes, PSWs, unsung heroes,
and she loved and adored Jake from the moment she saw him. She's taken his passing very, very hard as well.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, she expected to be with him for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
In some form.
Yeah.
But we called her his honorary big sister. But she had him out at a playground, and it was pretty early on, and some kid was like, why isn't he talking? So she told the kid, it's because he speaks Greek. I was like, listen, first of all, you're going to run into the kid who actually does speak Greek one time, and that's not going to work. I said, but it's okay. He just simply say he's autistic. He doesn't talk. It's fine. We don't have to pretend he's something he's not. And she got over that very quickly. But I say it was harder on me than people being mean to us. No one was ever mean, but I just seeing the differences, particularly when he was young, was really, difficult. I did have one time, he was still young enough that when the other issue becomes, when he needs to use the bathroom and we're in public, I got to take him in the ladies' room. I'm not going in the men's room, and I'm not letting him go in the men's room by himself unless it's a single stall.
Yeah.
So unless it's a Starbucks, he's coming into the ladies' room with me. And he was still young enough that it wasn't an issue. And I remember we were in Target. We used the bathroom. Mm-hmm. And as we're washing up, there's once again, probably a little 5-6-year-old girl says to her mother, he doesn't talk. Why doesn't he talk? And I was just about to turn around and say, well, it's because he's autistic, and explain. And the mother, before I can do that, she grabs her daughter and goes, don't say that. I'm sure he's fine. And runs her out of there like she had said something horrible. And I was like, I really would be happy to explain. It's not horrible. He just doesn't talk. It's part of who he is. And sometimes when we'd be like, in a grocery store in the checkout line, and the checkers would try and talk to Jake, and I'm like, what are you, crazy? Let him talk. And then I was like, oh, that's right. They don't know that. And you wouldn't know that just to look at Jake.
Yeah.
I'm biased, but he was a gorgeous child. And, it took a few seconds for people to realize he was a little different.
And I respect the fact that you talk about the fact that it's a hidden disability, right? Because even like now in my current situation where I'm really good, I still have to remind people that I'm on the spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
Because people forget.
Yeah. I would say, I know we were talking with board members earlier, and one board member said he was surprised. I have to, with our staff members who are autistic, I have to remind myself of that too, and to make sure that they're getting the self-care they need, that they're not overdoing it, and just that they're going to view some things differently, and to keep that in mind.
Can we dispel a few myths?
Sure.
Because one of the things that rubs me the wrong way is when I hear all of this crap, like if you hire somebody on the spectrum, you're expected to have all of this additional burden. Now, you, as somebody who's hired somebody on the spectrum, can attest to the fact that that's not necessarily true.
Oh, no. It's, and we've hired more than one autistic person. Every autistic person is different. Yes. That is always the main takeaway. Anytime I talk to groups, do presentations, whatever.
If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
It's one of those truisms that's actually true, is what I tell people. So the accommodations needed are going to change for person to person. Plus, they're going to change, if someone says, oh, I'm not feeling well today, they may need a little bit more support than when they're feeling good. The other thing is that, and this is one thing I learned actually from my son's first grade teacher. Mm-hmm. She said to me, because it's my older boy who's in a gen ed class, and she goes, I have 24 kids in my classroom. Some of them have IEPs, some don't, but they've all got special needs. Just because I'm providing accommodations or what that autistic employee needs to be successful, we're doing the same thing for the non-autistic employees. It may be different things, but it's still, everyone needs accommodations. It's a more matter, and we're a small enough organization. We've got 2 full-time, 3 full-time, 1 part-time employee.
Yeah.
So I've got a very small team to manage, and I can, I know them very well, and you do what fits for that person within the realm of what's possible. Yeah. One of our staff members who is not autistic does not like driving over bridges. We live in Portland. There's a lot of bridges.
That's fair. Yeah.
She lives on the west side. I try and assign, if we have an event or something, we try and keep her on the west side. Sometimes you can't. And, but you can also, she's willing to drive over the Selwood Bridge, but not the Markham Bridge. So the bigger bridges, so you work around it and you figure it out. Sometimes, when we do our airport events, she'll take an Uber over, so she doesn't have to drive.
And the other part too is like, there's this misconception that we need a lot of accommodations.
Once again, I think it's depends on the person. Yeah.
Right. I do have accommodations at work, right? I do, because I'm autistic. I need them.
Okay.
But it's not like anything that's beyond the realm of believability.
Right.
Like the biggest one, that was the biggest hurdle, was I need to know what's going to happen at the meeting before the meeting takes place. Like
An
no
agenda?
surprise meetings.
Yeah.
You have to give me a day notice.
Oh, okay.
So that's an accommodation that I have in place at work. And that makes all the difference. Because if I have a surprised meeting, my default, because of the way my negative brain works, I think I'm getting fired.
Oh my God.
Right? Surprise meeting, fired. Surprise meeting, fired.
Okay.
So please, can you just tell me what the meeting's about so I don't think I'm getting fired tomorrow? And I know that I'm never going to get fired. I do a great job, but I can't help my brain but thinking about surprise meeting, fired.
Well, this is something that Jonathan Chase talks about a lot. He's an autistic adult in the Portland area who was on our board for many, many years. And he's a speaker and a mentor, and he does really great work. But he said, he put out a book called, I think, From Surviving to Thriving in the Classroom. And he pointed out in that book that the accommodations the teachers make for an autistic child help the entire classroom. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are thrilled to get a day's notice of a meeting too. They just never thought to ask for it and never thought that they would get that approved, And there's a great comic, cartoon drawing of it's just like lots of snow and ice out, and the school custodian is clearing the steps for the kids to get in, and the kid in the wheelchair says, well, can you clear the ramp so I can come in? And he goes, okay, I'll do that as soon as I'm done the stairs. And the kid goes, well, if you clear the ramp, all of us can use the ramp. So maybe it's an accommodation to have the ramp and to clear the ramp, but you know what? Everybody can use that ramp. Yeah. So I don't see accommodations as something, and I think this is what people have to get out of the mindset of. An accommodation is not something you're doing specific to that employee, only for that employee.
Right.
Sometimes it might be, but a lot of the accommodations for that employee really help the whole office function better.
And really, like in a perfect world, it's one of the things that I respect the most about ASO, right? Is the commitment here that I see towards diversification and the efforts to include a more robust group of folks to the table.
Yeah.
And it's been my experience, the more diverse the team, the more successful the team is. What prompted that change from ASO to sort of focus on those efforts?
Well,
because I have to commend the organization for doing it. It's one of the reasons I joined the board.
Oh, good.
Right?
I would say, first of all, diversification can be difficult in Oregon in terms
That's
of.
fair.
And I'm from back east, so that kind of showed up pretty quickly. Wow.
Yeah.
But just from an understanding, and it really was board driven, which I give a lot of props to the board to say. Because what you have happen with a lot of boards is you have people on the board and they recommend it to new people, and it's people they know, and it's people who tend to look and think and act like them.
Yeah.
For the longest time, we had one autistic board member. It was Jonathan. And also, I think it was a little bit from the Autism Society of America. So we're in a state affiliate of the Autism Society of America, but we're a very autonomous affiliate system where we raise all of our own money. Our board governs all the decisions here in Oregon.
And I might have to say that, Oregon's the best of all of them.
I think so too.
I think so too. We've taken on half another state. So, I think, there's that.
Yes. So, yes. But, there was a director from National. It was funny. He's like, you must have at least one autistic board member.
Okay.
And it was like, we've had an autistic board member for years.
Yeah.
So good. I'm glad that's out there. But it also became, one person can get tokenized. We now have 3 autistic board members.
Yep. Yep.
And we have another one in the pipeline. And just, I think having more autistic people on the board provides us with more voices, and we're actually looking at another board member who is non-speaking. So more voices, however that is communicated, because we as an autism organization trying to serve the autistic community and the autism community, if we're not hearing from autistic people, how well are we serving the autistic community? It's kind of a no-brainer in a lot of ways.
But I also appreciate the balance. parents, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that there's a concerted, conscious effort to make sure that the organization has folks who are parents,
Yes.
professionals, and people who are experiencing it.
Yes.
And I think that is the trifecta, because everybody's at the table.
Yeah. And we yes. And it's like at an IEP meeting.
Yeah.
When you go to an IEP meeting, you have, the district rep, you have the teacher, you have the parents. And the parents are the only ones who are really looking after only their child's interest.
Right.
When you come to a board meeting, of course, every board member cares about the entire organization. But a parent of a young kid is going to want to make sure that those issues are addressed. A parent of an adult is going to want to make sure those very different issues are also addressed. Providers are going to want to make sure those are, issues are addressed. An autistic adult is going to want to make sure that the issues they're seeing within their community are addressed. So it makes sure that we don't focus too heavily on any one sort of subset of the autism community, because there's so much to do. And there's
so much need.
Yeah, and it can feel a little overwhelming, absolutely.
And so we're coming to the close of our time here, but I wanted to highlight some of the things that ASO is doing.
Sure.
Because I think it's important, especially in terms of the things that we've got going on in Oregon, which is very unique with the Autism Timeout and some of the other programs that we've got, right?
Yeah.
What is the most popular program right now?
Which you just referred to. There's two. There's the Take a Break on ASO and Take a Breather on ASO, which are probably too closely named, as best I could come up with. Take a Break we've been doing for over 14 years, and it's an evening out for parents of autistic kids. And we provide a $25 gift certificate to a restaurant of the parent's choice, 2 movie tickets to a theater of their choice, and we'll also pay, I think it's $72 for someone of the parent's choice to come and watch the children in the household. Not just the autistic child, but all the children in the household, so the parents can go out, have dinner, watch a movie, relax, recharge, be better caregivers. And that's available once a year. Mm-hmm. It's also available for parents of children of any age. It can be an adult child, and also for foster parents, resource parents, they're called now. The one catch to that is that we don't have people to send out to families to watch the children. We don't have a stable of babysitters. Right. But we get around that by saying, it's the parent's choice. So whoever the parent feels comfortable leaving their children with.
Whether it's an uncle, cousin,
family member's fine. They don't need a background check. Mm-hmm. If they truly have no one, like I have no family in Oregon. Yeah. I had no one. We'll try and help. In the same boat. Yeah. We would try and help them find someone. And we, and there's different folks around. So that's been going on. Very, very popular program. We reach 250 families a year like that.
So to circle on that, just one thing though, because I think it's important for people to understand, right? Parents of kids with special needs often don't get a break.
Right.
And I think a lot of parents who don't have kids with special needs don't understand the level of sacrifice and the level of effort.
Every parent needs a break.
Every parent needs a break.
But a parent of a child with a disability, there's an extra level there.
Yes.
And I always used to say, as autistic kids are like any other kids, but more so.
Yeah.
Every kid benefits from a routine. An autistic child has to have their routine, or they're going to have a meltdown.
I have to walk the same path every night. I have to. Yeah. If I have to alter my path, I'm dysregulated, and then it's like my walk is useless.
Yeah. And having those routines help the world make sense. And when those routines are messed up, now the world doesn't make sense, and you see meltdown. So there's a lot of things that an autistic child benefits from, that any child benefits from, just more so.
Yeah.
So the other program that's also really popular is our Take a Breather program, which is newer. It was actually suggested by one of our autistic board members a few years ago. And it's a similar idea, but it's for autistic individuals ages 16 and older. And we will provide gift cards for up to $100 in value for whatever that person would like to do to relax and recharge. And I just went through looking at all of them. We have a lot of requests for sensory items, for art supplies. for fitness equipment. Somebody wanted roller skates. A lot of requests to go to the coast for restaurants, movies. Trying to think. Oh, someone wanted to do a home coffee shop, so they wanted to buy coffees. Another person wanted to go on Amtrak, so I got them an Amtrak gift card. Whatever's going to give them a break.
Yeah.
Because it's so widely varied, but people want to be able to get an entrance to a Comic-Con, that kind of thing. And once again, it's available once a year. We're anything we can get a gift card for, we're open to.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted a tattoo. We got them a gift card for a tattoo.
That's awesome.
If someone would meet the requirements of both programs, so they're an autistic parent who's autistic themselves, we ask that they choose one program or the other, so we can meet as many as possible.
That's fair.
And I think we did about 140 of those last year, and we're on track to do far more this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's also going back to the Take a Breather program for the parents. A lot of times parents don't feel comfortable accessing resources.
Oh, I know that.
And that's a whole nother issue. But this can be we found that it's a way in. Every parent needs a break. Getting a break through this program it's something that they can comfortably accept. And oftentimes it opens the door to conversation about what other resources there are that their child may be eligible for and they should be looking at.
Yeah. Well, I really hope we can do this again.
Oh, sure.
Because there's so many things I would love to talk to you if I had the time to talk to you about it.
Oh, I'm always happy to talk. I'm also always happy to talk about my son, well, both of my kids, but particularly my son, Jakey, because talking about him helps keep his memory alive for me. So I appreciate that.
And there are not enough parents who have the world of knowledge and experience that you bring. Yeah. So in closing, I did want to say thank you very much for everything. And I wanted to give you a kindness coin.
Oh, thank you.
So
that's wonderful. Thank you.
For being one of the most kindest people out there and doing all of the stuff that you do for the autism community. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate that.
And just being a part of the board in this organization has meant so much to me. Just because, I started the support group for ASO, right? And
it's a great group.
I love doing it. And one of the things I think people don't recognize is it does so much for me.
Good.
Just as much it is for the people that participate, right? And so, in my final notes, I just would like to encourage anybody listening, join your local Autism Society. If you're on the spectrum, join a support group of people on the spectrum. If you're a parent, join a support group with parents on the spectrum. If you're a family member, join a support group. Just find other people who have this experience, get to know them, ask questions, because once you're not alone, it's not as hard.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Until you find that first meeting with that first person and you go, I thought I was the only one who thought that way.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. So,
and and two things on that. One is we don't have any membership fees, so the Autism Society of Oregon. Some affiliates do, but we do not. The other thing is, if you try a support group and it doesn't click for you, try another one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not everything works for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with mental health providers as well.
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah.
If you find one and you don't like them, try a different one. Toby, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed talking with you, Sean. Always great getting to know you better.
We're good.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for my kindness coin too. Now it looks like I'm supposed to pass it on.